to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today on the show, we have Luyi Kathy Zhang. She is a palliative care physician, and she wrote the KevinMD article, "Maybe We're Not All Hanging in There, and That's Okay." Welcome to the show.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
I was born in China, came to the States at a very young age. And looking back, I think I always loved science. Like I can actually remember the covers of some books that I used to love, like the digestive system and diabetes and that sort of thing. So I guess I've always kind of wanted to be in science and in medicine. And I went to medical school, trained in internal medicine, became a hospitalist, and I loved being a hospitalist. But after a few years, I felt like something was missing. So I thought, I feel like I need to get a little bit deeper. And I didn't feel like I had the tools and the training that I wanted to have to be able to do that. So I went into fellowship for palliative care and hospice. And that's what I do now. I'm an inpatient-based palliative care attending at a safety net hospital in New York City. And I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else. I kind of, in some ways, I'd always thought that there were people saying like, oh, medicine is a calling. And I felt that, but I feel that so much more doing what I'm doing now.
So what are some of the specific things about palliative care that drew you to that specialty?
I think one of the things is that it's so interdisciplinary, it's so intersectional, you know, it goes across any specialty, right? Coming from your own specialty, you see death and dying and serious illnesses within medicine, within surgery, within neurology. But then when you get to palliative care, you see all of that. And so in a way, it's kind of like being a generalist, but for the end of life or that sort of thing. And I've always loved sitting with patients, hearing their stories. And it just felt like it was the right way to use me as a clinician, as a physician. I used to take trainings in conflict resolution and things like that. And I love the fact that also palliative care focuses on self-care as the vehicle by which we deliver the best care for our patients, right? Like if we can't manage our own emotions, if we can't be the person that our patients need us to be, how do we really take the best care of them when they're in such extremis, or they're suffering, or they're in pain, or their families are feeling the same thing?
You mentioned that you had some training in the past on conflict resolution. So how specifically does that come into play on a typical day or case in palliative care?
That's a good question. I mean, we don't get, let's say in palliative care or hospice fellowship, we don't necessarily get conflict resolution training, but when patients are ill or dying, emotions get heightened either by the patient, the family. Sometimes, and everyone has probably seen this, people get angry, really, really angry, which is okay. They're in a system, they're facing something that they probably never faced before. And, sometimes we have to try to manage a situation where we're like, hey, let's try to see if we can come together, or we'll try to bring it back to the patient, right? A lot of people or families get caught up in the details or what they want. And sometimes one of the things that's really helpful is to bring it back to what the patient wants, that we're all here for the patient.
Let's transition now into the KevinMD article that you wrote. It's titled, "Maybe We're Not All Hanging in There, and That's Okay." Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Absolutely. So I wrote that January, February of this year, and that was, the kind of first winter with COVID, and the surge was going kind of everywhere. We had our first surge in New York, obviously, in March of 2020, and as a palliative care team, our numbers just went up like wildfire. I think we at our highest was like 4 times our normal list. And we had to get volunteers and all these people to help with the the crisis that was going on. And it took a real toll on me, and as it did, I think, for so many of us. But I found myself in a place where I was so emotionally drained. I was like, in despair, like the lowest kind of part that I can think of in my life. I was having panic attacks and, probably what I would even say some, very dark, maybe even suicidal thoughts. And I went to a therapist and got the help that I needed. And when I wrote the article, it was probably around the tail end of my therapy. I was just finishing up. And I just thought, if I could share maybe some of the realizations that I came to with whoever may be feeling the same way, then maybe that could help someone who's going through the same thing or has gone through something similar. And so that's kind of what I wanted to say, which was I kept telling myself that I was okay. You hear people in the hospital, you ask them, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm hanging in there, I'm hanging in there. When in reality, I at least was falling apart. I was a mess. And I think for me, it was a disservice to not recognize that how I was feeling. We say to our patients and our family members and the patient's family members, like, it's okay to feel sad, or it's okay to feel angry. It's okay. We normalize these things for our patients. But on the flip side, we say, oh, I have to be strong. I'm a doctor, I'm a clinician, I'm trained to be able to deal with these things. When in reality, like, no one's ever trained for a global pandemic, right? So that's what I wanted to share, which was the thought that was, maybe we're not all hanging in there, and that's okay. And the sentence that I used was, it sucks. And I think, like, it sucks and that's okay, right? It's like right now, it's not going well, but I'm doing the best that I can, and that's okay.
Like you said, a lot of physicians, they're trained to put up that wall and really not show any weakness. And when you did show some of that vulnerability, when people asked you if you were okay, what were some of their responses when you said that it sucks and I'm doing what I can?
I had a lot of feedback from people who just felt like they were being seen, that they were feeling the exact same things, but they didn't feel that they, were validated enough to be able to feel that way, or that they could feel that way. Like you said, we're so built into this system where, like, if you, let's say in medical training, you do something wrong, it's highlighted on rounds, right? That sort of thing. And so I had a lot of positive responses from even just talking to people in the hospital, and even from writing the article, where people were like, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because it's something that's affecting all of us, and it's needed to talk about it. I still know some colleagues who have been affected and they haven't felt comfortable enough to seek help or go to therapy or that sort of thing. And I think that that's, again, goes back to the self-care and this notion of how do we best take care of ourselves, our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, so that we can then go back to the hospital, to clinic, to the office, and help our patients the best way that we can.
You wrote this article earlier this year, and tell me what the situation is like now when it comes to clinician self-care, and contrast that to what it was like earlier this year.
I think there's been certainly a rise in awareness, certainly during the pandemic, especially as different pockets of the nation were going through it, right? At first it was in New York, and then parts of the Northeast, the Northwest, and then it went to the South. And I think everyone has kind of gone through this cycle of like, oh God, it's here, it's among us. How do we cope with this? And then how do we cope with the aftermath? When you're in it, the stress of it all, you don't really notice because you're just running on autopilot. But it's when you get a little bit more rest and the numbers aren't as high that you're like, holy crap, this is awful. I think where the awareness helps, I think a lot of institutions and a lot of individuals are pushing for that type of either programs or awareness in their own hospitals. But I do think we have a long way to go. So it's the start of, I think, a broader conversation that needs to continue, quite frankly.
So when you say that we have a long way to go, what specific things need to happen to further address this?
Starting with even medical education and training, right? When I was in training, there were many times where I just felt like I couldn't make a mistake. Otherwise, I would be reprimanded, or I would have my mistakes aired out to everyone else in the program and be embarrassing. But there were moments where I did feel supported. I did feel that someone was looking out for me. And that starts in medical school, that starts in training, all the way up to when we are working, and with support from leadership, with support from the C-suite and that sort of thing. I think we just have to really talk about what's happening to us, what we're feeling, why we're feeling the way that we are, and to champion the voices that are trying to make a change, that are trying to make things better for the people who do want to stay in medicine. Because there are a lot of us who just, after this, are like, I can't deal with it anymore. It's too much. And that's not what really anyone wants going into medicine. You don't think that you're going to leave, but sometimes you have to do what you feel is best for you, and sometimes that's not staying in medicine.
We're talking to Luyi Kathy Zhang. She's a palliative care physician, and she wrote the KevinMD article, "Maybe We're Not All Hanging in There, and That's Okay." Kathy, for those clinicians who are burned out and thinking of leaving medicine, or they're in the depths of despair as you were earlier this year, what kind of specific actionable advice do you have for these clinicians?
What I realized in therapy, and it's taken me a long time to get there, was being aware of what my own thoughts were, the things that I was saying to myself, things like, I'm fine, I'm handling it. And I think that was such a breakthrough for me, because we're so used to intellectualizing things. We're academics, we're smart, we take care of patients and in life and death situations. And we're so used to giving that we sometimes forget what it's like to give for ourselves. And so I think the awareness of what we're doing, the boundaries that, let's say, we're not putting up, the safe boundaries for us, I think those are some actionable things that we can do. The things like in the article, it sucks and I'm doing what I can. The "and" is validating that right now it's not an ideal situation. And the latter part of the sentence is giving ourselves the grace and the self-compassion to say, like, I'm just muddling through, I'm doing the best that I can, and that's enough. And some days your best is seeing all your patients before noon and banging out all the consults and that sort of thing, and feeling on top of the world. And then other days your best is just showing up at work, and that's it. And that's okay. I think normalizing that experience, that we are humans, we obviously are going to be affected by everything that's going on here, and that it's okay sometimes to not be okay, but that there are avenues and channels that we could get supported. There are ways that we can get help, and it shouldn't be stigmatized. I think that conversation is definitely changing, but there's still vestiges of it among all of us, I think.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
And the take-home message is really that, take care of yourselves. It's okay to feel all the things that you're feeling, normalizing this experience, this wild, unprecedented, year and a half that we've had, and to, check in on the people that you might see that might not be themselves, that might not be doing well, because we're all in this together. So I would say that that's what I'm hoping people will get from it.
Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin.